Hi, so I'm Tim Robinson. I'm module leader of PGO3, which is the Action Research module. This video is intended as a kind of information starter pack for those of you who missed the intensives in November, or maybe you were there but you want a little refresher about what happened on the day. I should say, if you don't actually have an Action Research question, I would book a tutorial ASAP. I don't think that's the kind of thing we can sort out with a generic video. So get yourself some FaceTime so you can sort out, what kind of question is going to work for you. So I'm hoping this will be most useful for those of you who have you've got the headline, you've got the title roughed out, as it were, but you're not quite sure what that's going to consist of in terms of the stages that you need to go through to make it into an actual project. Okay, so I think a good Action Research question will typically have sort of key features that we can point to. First of all, it has to matter to you. It has to align with your values, what you think is important in your work, so it has to be worth the bother. I think it also has to relate directly to your own professional practice, like be embedded in what it is that you do. I think one of the strengths of Action Research is that it's not really about some expert teacher trainer coming in from outside and telling you what to do. It's much more about the individual exploring what works in their own specific context. It also has to be something that you can actually change. So yes, you may have frustrating administrative issues or in terms of course structure or class size or whatever, but you can't necessarily change those things. So Action Research needs to be based on something that you are actually in control of. And it will typically start with that phrase, how do I improve ... and you get to decide what the ... will be. Okay. So Action Research runs on a cycle. Very much like a Kolb cycle. So if we assume that we're starting at the top, we're going to evaluate our start position. So where are we right now with this thing that's bothering us? What form does it take? Why does it matter? Then we're going to move to the planning stage, where you're fishing around for ideas and advice about what you might do to change this thing. Then you're going to put this plan, whatever it is, into action, and then you're going to stop acting and reflect back over what you've done, and then that'll take you back up to the top again. So if that's one Action Research cycle, for PGO3 we need 2 cycles. And at this point, we're now halfway through November at the time of filming, so a very good sort of rough guide to the timescale of this might be to start your first Action Research cycle, say in January, and make that one term. Then that gives you sort of Easter for the reflect and evaluate bit, and then plan your next cycle. So it's sort of cycle 1 will be in term 2, and then your second cycle will be in term 3, and then that'll give you the summer to write it up. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so it's very tempting once you sort of grasp the idea that you can identify something in your own practice that you want to change. It's very tempting just to jump in and go, oh, well, I'll try this, or I'll change that. But unfortunately, there's a catch. Get it? Okay. So Action Research works best when it's based on 2 things, when there are 2 threads that run through it. And one is evidence, and the other is collaboration. So if we talk about the evidence bit first, it's worth saying that you need evidence all the way through. All 4 stages of your cycle will involve evidence, although different kinds of evidence depending on where you are. So if you think about evaluating your start point, that could be based on, let's say, a reflective diary, like a research journal that you keep. So you could be noting down your own feelings, your own reflections about what's happening in the room. You could note down some specific examples, instances of this thing happening. But you could also include examples of students' work, or you could be inviting other teachers in to see the lessons where this thing is happening or not happening for confirmation, or you could be videoing lessons so that you've got something to sort of analyse and see what's happening, or maybe screenshots of what people are doing, or you could be talking to the students about what they think about this thing, talking to the student reps, whoever. So think of each sort of stage of this cycle as being like a bundle of things rather than just, you know, your opinion or your experience. What other external sources could you bring into this situation to make a really kind of convincing package to say, this is where you're starting from. Think of it like a marker that you're sticking in the ground to say, this is where I'm beginning, and then you've got something very convincing and robust to sort of look back on at the end of cycle 1 and then again at the end of cycle 2. So you can look back and say, that's where I was, and now see where I've ended up, you know, later. When you get to the planning phase, okay, so the changes that you want to make, that could be based on your own sort of hunches, your own experience, and that's fine. And again, you could be writing that stuff down in a research journal that you're keeping. But think about where else you might get ideas and advice from. If you're planning on changing something, you might be, for example, finding, you know, big educational theories in your reading, or it might be more specific individual teaching strategies. But then it could also be, you know, you're interviewing your colleagues. Have they got ideas or advice? Could you sit in on other people's lessons and see what they do? Could you be asking the students for advice? Who knows? You could be watching YouTube videos, whatever. So think about bolting a whole load of stuff together to make a plan. So it's almost like you're looking for evidence as to why your plan will work. And the more different kinds of evidence you can find, and the more credible those sources, then the more convincing your plan is going to be. It's going to look better, but it's probably going to work better as well. When you get to the acting phase, again, think of what evidence might consist of. If you're trying to track the progress of your intervention, could this be, again, videos of the lessons? Could it be screenshots of students' work? Could it be interviews with the students about what they think about this new thing that you're trying? Could it be photos of the whiteboard or flip chart paper, whatever it is that you're generating by way of change? And then when you get to the final stage, the reflecting back over what you've done, again, think about a bundle of evidence that you could stick together to say, okay, this is where I've ended up compared with where I started. Okay, so just to be sort of explicit and see that stuff in a list, we could be talking a research journal, descriptions of practice and reflection on what's happening, examples of students' work, whether written or, you know, photos, screenshots, whatever, videos of lessons. I think that's a really useful one and can be quite powerful to give yourself. It's almost like you're observing yourself, and you could be analysing your video in various sort of formal ways to decide on what's happening in the room if that's relevant to the changes you want to make. Interviews with tutors or with students, possibly handing out questionnaires to students, whether online or in the class. Observations of other tutors can be a great source of advice, but then other tutors' observations of you and your lessons so that you can cross-check with them. Do you see this thing happening as well? Have you got any advice for me? What do I do? You know, you could be running focus groups with students. The student reps, I think, are a really useful resource because they act as a kind of cutout, don't they? So you can sort of maybe they can act as a mouthpiece for people who won't necessarily speak to you directly. Yeah, run a focus group with tutors or other kind of practitioners from different institutions or other people who run your module in different branches of BIM, you know, in different colleges. But also evidence from secondary research. So in other words, your reading, your background reading, whether, as I say, whether it's heavyweight educational theory or whether it's, you know, specific instances of teaching strategies that you can try out. So there's a whole bunch of places that you could look for evidence. One nice way to think of this is like an I, you, them. So if you think of the I bit, that's what do I know from my own experience. The you bit could be what evidence or advice or information can I get from people that I can actually talk to, people I can see, so other teachers or students, people who are involved in my work. And the them is, okay, so people out there that you can't actually get to talk to, but you can still get, you know, the theories or the strategies or the ideas from the reading. Okay. It's also worth saying that if you're talking about producing evidence using research methods such as you know, questionnaires or interviews or observations, focus groups, there are good and not so good ways of producing this kind of evidence, and this is where the research textbooks come in handy. think of them like reference books, basically, which is what they are. Don't try and read them like a novel. If you're thinking that an interview might be a good idea, fine. Just read a little chapter in one of our set books. You know, they're on the reading list, but just read the chapter on interviews. Don't try and read the whole thing, because your brain will melt and you'll lose the will to live. Yeah, and also the other thing to consider, which I mean will have been mentioned already, is the fact that when you're doing research that involve other people, there are clearly, you know, ethical issues involving how you relate to them, issues of consent, anonymity, respect of data, respect of, you know, individuals. So the ethical form is on the blog. Clearly, that is a crucial part of the idea of generating evidence involving other people. Okay, the second thread that needs to run through your project is the idea of collaboration. So most of the books on action research will mention this at some point, the idea of forming an action learning set. So the idea is that you get together with 3, 4, 5, whatever, other people who are doing action research, and this is like your research team. This is a support group, basically. And you can get together on a regular basis, every couple of weeks, every month, whatever, talk about each other's projects, give each other feedback, and there are formal ways of doing this as well as informal ways, and we'll be exploring some of those on the blogs or in the sessions. I think it's very constructive, it's very positive, it can be very motivational, but you can also use that situation to generate data for each other. So you can watch each other's videos, you can discuss ideas and come up with suggestions. So a really valuable part of doing a project. Okay, so I really hope this helps. Tutorials are available. Please feel free to book one if you feel you need it. Thank you.